Interpreter to the late Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping, vice president of the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing. China has upped its military spending. It's expanding its nuclear arsenal. Chinese President Xi Jinping has said that the country's military should be capable of, quote, fighting and winning wars. Victor, who do you want to fight and who do you want to win against?
First of all, the Chinese military spending is the second largest in the world, but it is only a fraction of that of the United States. China's military spending is for peace.
You say it's for peace, but your neighbors don't agree. Your neighbors are pretty worried about you. You go through the list: Japan, India, and the Philippines. Those are the elected governments of countries representing over 1.6 billion people in Asia. This is not the United States. This is not the West. These are your Asian neighbors saying, we're worried about China.
China does have a peaceful side of its culture, and I think that's what really makes it disarming, because if you go to China, in our culture, there's a certain characteristic that is not aggressive at all. It's quite the opposite. And I think a lot of the soft power export that the Chinese government does is to emphasize that part of our culture. A lot of people, especially people in the West who don't really know much about China, when you think about China, people mostly think about Buddhism or tea culture. And all of those things are true and they are quite dominant in our culture, but it doesn't mean that we're not aggressive or our government carries the same type of culture that the Chinese people obviously share.
Since 2022, China has increased military drills around Taiwan. Since then, there's been almost daily activity involving China's warships, drones, cyber attacks against Taiwan. China is getting ready to invade Taiwan, isn't it?
There is only one China. Taiwan is part of China, and the government of the People's Republic of China is the sole legitimate government for the totality of China.
He mentioned something. He said, we are the only legitimate government of this land. I think that's the biggest, carryover mistake in the eyes of the Chinese Communist Party. If your people didn't elect you into office, where does this legitimacy rest? So who gives you the power to rule, basically, to govern? And that's the biggest thorn in their throat. The Taiwanese government is elected right now, but the Chinese government is not. From a traditional Chinese perspective, there are two kings right now in the arena. From their perspective, there's only one winner that's going to come out of this. So it's either you die or I do. I think a lot of people don't understand they can't let Taiwan be. It doesn't matter how rich China gets or how developed it has turned into. It is an existential threat to them.
Why are you obsessed with Taiwan? Why not just leave them be?
In terms of defending China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, any inch of land is not 1 inch too much. Any one single person is not one person too many. So we need to achieve reunification as
Even though they don't want to be part of your country. 12% of the people of Taiwan say they want to reunify with China. 12%. You can't get more unpopular than that in that way.
Mehdi, it's not up to the people in Taiwan to decide about the one China policy.
You're very blunt in your disregard for people's views, freedoms, dignity. You say that you don't care about what they think.
This might sound bizarre to you. This might sound like contempt. Like the journalist said, you're so blunt about this kind of stuff. But I don't think he realizes how bizarre it sounds. It just doesn't register the same way for him and for anybody who grew up in that system or in that culture. The Chinese people, and the CCP didn't invent this, Chinese people never had a say, never had a right to decide for their own country. The Communist Party said that China is a dictatorship of the workers. You surrender everything to the party. There's no real guaranteed protected private properties. If you're lucky, you probably can have your apartment or your business for a certain period of time. But the ultimate ownership belongs to the party. They can take that away from you at any given time. And because in our long history, Chinese people never had a say, I think that's why the concept, communism as a concept, as a theory, it's so well adopted in our society because nothing really changed. They just put a different name on it. When you grew up in a country where you never really truly owned anything, I think it's hard for people to develop a sense of individual rights. You know, when people talk about the fundamental difference between the East and the West, this is a big part of it. So in the West, there is legally defined terms of the difference between the government and individual rights. And I know a lot of this is up to debate, but it's a given that people think that these things are different.
Let's talk human rights, Victor. You've called Uyghurs in China's Xinjiang province your brothers and sisters. How do you feel about the fact that at least 500,000, some say more, of your brothers and sisters are being detained in camps by the Chinese government? That's 5% of the adult Uyghur population, one of the highest imprisonment detention rates in the world.
Mehdi, the Uyghurs are a proud ethnic group, one of the 56 ethnic nationalities in China. The Uyghurs, as far as I'm concerned, are my true brothers and sisters. I know many of them. I travel to Xinjiang regularly, and I talk to many of the Uyghurs. Now, if anyone is serious about accusing China of practicing mass injustice to the Uyghurs, give me the evidence.
This breaks my heart. But remember in a previous episode, I talked about how Tiananmen Square massacre has been forgotten by our own people. The same is actually happening right now to this ethnic cleansing of Uyghur minorities in China right now. I can share with you a personal story. You know, while I was studying abroad in Canada, our top national newspaper, Globe and Mail, they published, I think it's a series of stories on the concentration camps in Xinjiang, that's the province. Even after my fellow Chinese international students left the regime, they still are completely unaware of the atrocity. And that ought to create constant conflicts and this, I guess, cognitive disconnect between the Chinese student community and the local community here. Just because you are physically here doesn't mean you're going to consume or believe a different narrative. And a lot of them grow up in that regime. The Chinese narrative is the only narrative that they believe. If someone grew up in a cult and all of a sudden you drag them out of the basement and you tell them it's not a post-nuclear world, it's going to take some adjustment. That's essentially what's been happening. For someone who grew up in that culture and who's only taught one narrative, this is extremely convincing.
I just did. Human Rights Watch say 500,000 people detained over the years in recent years.
You keep quote Human Rights Watch, and I tell you...
Do you know where they got those numbers from?
I don't know.
Can I tell you?
I don't know.
I thought you were the expert on You've been to Xinjiang. You've spoken to Uyghurs. You never heard these numbers?
I do not know where did they get the source.
So their source is the Xinjiang High People's Procuratorate, which has published its own statistics, Xinjiang official body, which says it's convicted 540,826 people prosecuted in the region since 2017. The United Nations Office for Human Rights looked at satellite footage. They say 10 to 20% of the population. Amnesty estimates 1 million people in camps. 500,000 is a conservative number.
Mehdi, if you quote that organization, please be assured that that organization has been completely discredited for the false information they came up with.
I love this game we're playing. You give me a source, I give you a source. They're discredited. They've said falsehoods.
Mehdi,
how can let me ask you a question. How many people are in detention in Xinjiang? You give me a number.
Listen, if you look at Xinjiang...
You give me a number.
If you look at... I do not have the number.
Why not?
Yeah.
Hold on. You can't say it's not 500,000 and then say you don't have a number. I have a number. I have sources. How many people do you think are detained?
Let me give you my reason.
No.
I go to Xinjiang a lot. I travel almost
So they're your brothers and sisters.
Xinjiang.
You go there a lot.
Another really nefarious thing I think the Chinese government did is look at what happened at Tiananmen Square. They locked down the city. They destroyed every piece of evidence they could destroy. And they would turn around and say, where's the evidence? It's kind of like, a criminal committed a crime and they wiped out the scene. And if you manage to miraculously find something, they would tell you that is not sufficient.
I live in the United States of America, where I can say that Donald Trump is hypothetically, an orange-faced narcissist. I also live here in the UK. I'm British. Here you have Rishi Sunak, the former Prime Minister, was called a pint-sized loser No one in China has that kind of freedom to talk about their government, to talk about President Xi Jinping in that way. You can't say anything like that. You wouldn't dare say anything like that because you know what will happen to you when you go home. You know what will happen to your family. That's what China is.
Mehdi, if you do anything, write anything, email or chat to your friends about taking anything action against, let's say, Prime Minister of Britain, President of the United States,
I didn't say that.
You'll be dealt with very swiftly.
Victor, you're a master of straw man. That's not what I said. I said Rishi Sunak was called a pint-sized loser. Would you call Xi Jinping a pint-sized loser?
Mehdi, each country has different sensitivities. In UK...
So you're admitting you can't criticize the Chinese government?
No. You can criticize the government if you are positive in your attitude.
You can criticize the government if you're positive.
Yes.
Is that the new philosophy?
No, if you can come up with your...
You've got to come up with nice insults.
No.
What then?
Constructive advice.
Constructive advice.
For example,
I'm loving
in dealing with the aging population.
Okay, this is comical, but it's also, I mean, he's honest. It's true. It's exactly like what he said here. Can you talk about Cultural Revolution? Maybe. But what you can't talk about is exactly how bad it is, whose fault it is. I mean, if you know a little bit of Cultural Revolution, you know how many people died. It's the biggest famine in human history, and it's completely man-caused. But you tell people that it's a natural disaster. You call it the 3-year natural disaster. You can talk about it that way. In other words, you can fabricate a beautiful, carefully packaged lie around it. That's your only way of talking about it. It's so twisted as I hear myself, but it's actually true. I remember this a few years ago. There was a famous TV host, Bi Fujian. So he basically, in a private conversation, talked to a group of friends how the Cultural Revolution is all Mao's fault. I mean, it's true, but that man, a very high-profile TV host, he disappeared after the video of him criticizing Mao for Cultural Revolution surfaced on the internet. We never heard of him anymore. So, and I think that's really where the sophistry comes in and really confuses people and give all the Mao and the CCP supporters an excuse to defend themselves. Like, oh, we can talk about Cultural Revolution. Look at this, but can we really? Or is that just an alternative version fabricated by the Chinese government to gloss over their terrible mistakes that does challenge their historical legitimacy as a ruling party?
In part 2, we'll be talking about President Xi Jinping. We'll be talking about the issue of dictatorship. I asked the question, is Xi Jinping gearing up to be president for life? Dictator-in-chief? I mean, he's the most powerful leader of China since Mao. He's abolished presidential term limits. He's now in his 3rd 5-year term as president. So I'll ask again tonight, is he now president for life, a true dictator?
For the record, first of all, Chinese President Xi Jinping will never be president for life. There will be a time limit. When it will be handled according to the Chinese legal system and constitution. Secondly, there is no dictator in China. Why? Because dictatorship simply doesn't work. Democracy means modernization. And how can you explain profound transformation of China over the past 45 years in China if you have dictatorship or authoritarian rule? No. Every leader in China will be put into a team, and teamwork will be much more important than individualism.
Maybe previous presidents did, maybe Jiang Zemin or Hu Jintao. Everyone knows Xi Jinping has centralized power, consolidated power, got rid of term limits. You say there's a way to get rid of him, but there isn't actually a legal way to get rid of him. He's in power for life, and he likes being a dictator. Why are we pretending?
Mehdi, allow me to remind you, the Communist Party of China, which is the ruling party of China, has a membership of up to 100 million people.
Yeah.
It's well structured. Every province, every state-owned enterprise, etc.
There's no division or debate within the Chinese Communist Party.
Listen to me. No single person in China can dictate to a population of 1.4 billion people and 100 million membership of the Communist Party of China.
Okay, let's test that.
That's a mission impossible.
Let's test that proposition.
Let me quote our greatest chairman, Mao Zedong. He said something that every Chinese citizen knows. 枪杆子里面出政权. that means political power comes from a gun barrel. A lot of people say Chinese people don't want democracy. I mean, how do we know? They don't have the freedom to speak. And I have to mention Tiananmen massacre again because people did want democracy. But what happened? There's a military crackdown. So in a very messed up way, Mao was actually right. The reason that they were able to suppress all these protests and people's desire for democracy is by military force, the most primal and brutal way for an authoritarian regime to govern.